Hey there, welcome. Thanks for joining us this week. I'm James Green, partner and VP for content at Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to welcome you for a discussion about IT careers, about staying current, about growth. We know that in technology in general, things are changing faster than ever, and when your job is to understand how to best deploy and maintain technology, staying on top of what's happening is really important. And because of how fast things are changing, in my opinion anyway, it's harder than it's ever been. And so we're going to have a discussion today about some ideas we have about how to stay current, about what's important, about how to focus on the right things to be able to level up in your career. So with me to have this conversation is Actual Tech Media CEO Scott Lowe. Scott, welcome. Thanks for being a part of this discussion.
I love this topic.
You have, a lot to say on this topic. You obviously have had your own path, and we'll be able to dig in a little bit there as far as maybe what some things that worked for you, stuff you've learned along the way. So let's get started by talking about trends, big picture stuff. It's important as an IT professional to keep an eye on what's happening in the industry, especially to be thinking about where things are headed. So just in general, any thoughts about keeping an eye on trends, about how to spot important trends, things like that?
Yeah, I mean, trends in general are a good indicator of things that people want to focus on, organizations want to focus on. That's why they're trends. But when we start to think about, things for the longer term, it can look like trends are sort of a flash in the pan. And Gartner even has the hype cycle for every new trend that ever hits the scene, right? Where you have all of these inflated expectations early on, then you have the trough of disillusionment, and then ultimately reality settles somewhere in the middle there, so that we have a place where we have sort of an equilibrium and a steady state where we see continued organic growth and how that potential trend ultimately plays out. But when we start to look at things on a longer term, we might start to think that we're just in this constant chaos of trends and new directions and shiny object syndrome in some ways, where people are glomming on to anything and everything and looking to throw it against the wall and see what sticks. And to a point that there's probably some truth to that, but I like to think about things longer term. In fact, I did a short video for today's summit that we're running right now that's actually running opposite this, that talked about what some of the trends that Gartner identified were back in 2010, then 2015, and then today. And you can draw a straight line from most of the trends that we saw in 2010 to what we see today. And so when I think about trends in general, I think they build on each other, obviously. And the longer that you're here doing this and paying attention to the industry kind of in a meta way versus just my head's down in my work every day way, I think you start to gain a baseline understanding for how to look at potential new trends and make a quick determination as to whether or not that's something your organization should consider. And then over time, understanding the context in which those trends operate. And part of that goes back to, and from a career perspective, experience versus rote knowledge. But over time, we look at like 2010, Gartner had a trend that was virtualization. Well, today that's obviously it's not a trend, it's just a fact. But if you can see where a lot of the technologies we're using today wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that. So having an understanding of the context of that is important.
Yeah. Something you said there that I've been thinking about a lot lately that I think is important here is just your altitude as you look at the problem. You said you can have your nose in the work and not be able to see the bigger picture. And I think something that's really important for IT professionals is to just regularly take a step back and look at things from a higher altitude because, we get, especially as professional nerds, it's easy to get excited about a cool technology thing. And sometimes you can get so into that one thing that you lose sight of, A, other important technology things, and B, the main goals of the business. And this is something I want to talk about a little bit more later, but we have to remember to keep that first and then the technology as the enabler versus, and trust me, I've been guilty of this just as much as anybody, getting so excited about the technology thing for the sake of the cool technology thing. And that's, most of us, that's not what we're here to do.
No, but there's also something else there. So a long time ago, I wrote a just a 2 article series for Tech Republic that had a title of 10 things IT should stop doing. And this was back in the late like 2008, 9, 10 timeframe. So it would look very different today. Um, it's clear though that even in IT, where we are faced with this, what people perceive sometimes as chaotic change, people very much get stuck in a rut. But there's also some um, desire for stability and job security because people want to keep their jobs. And I wrote this article, and basically these are things that IT shouldn't do anymore. The value to the organization is not high, and there's other ways to accomplish these goals in a more efficient way. I can't remember what they all were, but it was things like servicing printers, stuff that you just wouldn't do anymore in most organizations. But back then, it was sort of a little bit more common to be doing that kind of stuff. I didn't get feedback as much on with ideas on other things that people would suggest IT stop doing. I got feedback of, oh great, articles like this are going to put me out of a job. And I think in an industry defined by change, people have to embrace it more, and understand that the trend that we see today are things that our our C-suite is going to see, and we have to be ready with understanding of solutions, understanding of potential fit and alignment, and be able to have reasonable answers to questions that people may ask about whether or not certain things that have hit the market are applicable to our business or our industry. And that's one of like any job, we have people that want to go in, do it, and go home, and don't want to progress. Now, that's not the vast majority of people, but there are people like that we need to make sure we can reach, and help them understand that staying current is good for their career as well as for their business, for their company.
Yeah, I think it sounds harsh to say, but the reality is in a role where things are changing very quickly from a technology standpoint, if you're looking at a statement like maybe businesses should stop maintaining their own printers and saying this is going to put me out of a job, I think you're looking at it wrong, and it might put you out of a job if that's how you're going to look at it. You know?
Yeah, and there's nothing, and I want to be careful to not bash those people too much because I get it. There are people. There's a work to live, live to work, but you also, I think, no matter the career path you've chosen, whether it's IT, whether it's something else altogether, everyone needs to own professional development. They need to continue to grow, or they're ultimately going to find themselves, as basically the buggy whip manufacturer in an age of automobiles. And it's just the reality of the world is going to move beyond them, and they're not going to have the skills or the knowledge to be able to stay current.
Yeah. So another hard thing that comes up then is even if you're a person who is comfortable with the fact that yes, things are going to change and I'm going to need to stay on top of the latest, a lot of people who are really driven will become an expert in particular technologies, and those can go away too. And it's one thing if like you had a really easy gig and now that's kind of going away and you don't like it, but what almost seems harder to me is when you've spent 5, 10 years becoming the expert's expert at, let's just say it was virtualization because you used that as an example. I spent some time in my career being very, very good at that one thing. And when that becomes, as you said, just a fact now and people aren't really excited about it anymore, it's actually not as big of a deal that you're like the expert's expert on that. You need to move on to the next thing. And that's like emotionally hard because
Hmm.
you've become so intimately familiar with this thing. It's intimidating because you're kind of, in the case of virtualization, I'm not scared of virtualization anymore. I know it inside and out, but in this case, Kubernetes and containerizing all our apps, I'm not an expert in that, and all of a sudden I'm the new guy again. And that's really hard. And I think, frankly, if you want to have a career in IT as a practitioner, it's just the reality of the thing. You have to be ready to jump on to the next thing and start to understand it and get good at it.
Yeah, and I think let's use virtualization as an example. Um, let's take that a step higher. I mean, virtualization was really an introduction for a lot of people to software-defined infrastructure. And if you look at it from that perspective, virtualization is just one component in that bag. And you were a really good practitioner for that one thing. Now, there's other things you were good at too, but that was the one thing you focused on in your consulting work. But if you look at that as if you look at Kubernetes as the next natural progression for stuff like that, you would have been looking at it earlier um, in the context of this whole software-defined infrastructure initiative. And think about cloud; it's all software-defined. I mean, with few exceptions. If you are a virtualization expert, you have the baseline understanding for how this stuff works together to be able to more quickly grasp cloud concepts and Kubernetes concepts than you would have if you didn't have that knowledge. So I don't see if you ended if your entire career was focused on I'm going to learn VMware and that's it, and I mean vSphere and that's it, you're going to limit yourself to a certain period of time, and then you're going to be washed up out of the market. And it goes back to now, if you had stayed a consultant, you would have expanded your product knowledge around VMware's other offerings. You would have learned about Tanzu, and so you'll be a container expert, and all this other stuff. So
Yep.
it goes back to what your your career goals are too. If you want to maintain currency and helping organizations, do the most they can with what they have, then that's going to serve you well. But if it's I want to become a vSphere expert, nothing else, it's more inwardly focused, and it's going to be ultimately limiting.
So you mentioned being able to carry that experience forward. I think one of the things that makes really kind of veteran, exceptional IT professionals great is carrying all that experience forward. So even though, uh, whatever it is, their mainframe experience is not relevant anymore, pretty much everything we do in computing is iterative. It's building on something that we did before, that we learned before. And so even if the practice isn't actually maintaining that mainframe system, understanding how that worked probably still has some relationship to how things work today. And so I think a big part of the value of a great IT professional that you just can't get around is experience.
Yeah, and I've been in IT for 27 years. I've been doing it for quite a while. Um, the stuff that I learned in my first year of IT, I still, in some way, shape, or form, practice today in some in various ways. In that era, I was wiring K-12 schools for their very first connections to the internet using this new technology called 10 base T, which obviously, you know, is if you ran that today, then you'd be insane. But um, it everything we're doing since then has built on that. What I think we get with more time in career, and it's just obviously clear, is basically the ability to provide context to new decisions. So if we look at potential paths for the business or potential initiatives, a, a lot of what we've done sort of repeats itself historically. And you can get more quickly make a determination as to whether something is going to work or not work. Now, that can also give you blinders because your experience is not the end all be all of world knowledge. So you got to take that into consideration as well and make sure you have context for that. I worked in certain industries. Maybe that's not going to flow well to other industries from a context perspective. But it's important that we see that the experience that people who've been in their careers longer can bring can help organizations with that critical context that fresher people that may have better rote technical skills, current technical skills, may not always have. And I think both are equally important. You have to have technical skills to be able to leverage today's technologies, but you have to have the experience and knowledge to understand what's going to work and what's not going to work. And the longer you spend in your career, the easier it is to make those assessments more quickly.
So there's ditches on either side of the staying current road. So the first side that we talked about is not keeping up, not staying current, not knowing what trends you should be on top of. On the other side of the ditch is shiny object syndrome, where
Yeah.
every cool new thing that comes about, you're really into that. Scott, what are your thoughts on keeping shiny object syndrome at bay and kind of seeing, taking in the landscape and all the new stuff that's out there, but staying focused on what's important?
Yeah, shiny object syndrome is a real thing, and I've seen people. I mean, the people lament, especially IT folks, lament that somebody in their C-suite read a magazine. Now we have to do X, right? And I, it's hard to have. There's no really defined line of when something's a shiny object and when something's actually a real trend until it hits reality. Now, my advice would be, obviously don't just jump on everything immediately once it hits a top 10 list somewhere. But once it does, take a look at the potential for the technology and see if there's applicability. And for IT pros and decision makers, a broad understanding of all of the trends that people are talking about can help counter C-suite arguments when they come back and say we need to be doing X. If you're well versed enough in what X means, you can have a more appropriate discussion with that person about whether or not it's applicable to the business. And I think most people will be receptive to a discussion about how applicable something is to their business, rather than just jumping on the train and doing it. Well, not everyone, unfortunately, but most people should be receptive to that kind of conversation. So it doesn't mean you have to jump on every trend immediately, but what it does mean is you need to understand what's happening in the market so you can have a competent discussion about it with people, with arguments about what's good about it, what's not good about it, and what your thoughts are on applicability to the business, and maybe take a not right now approach and let's wait and see what happens with this trend before we jump on it. But if you don't have any argument, you say I've never heard of it, it's not going to help you.
There's something I learned as a consultant and architect that I think is relevant here, which is certain things from a technology stack perspective, certain things are pretty easy to swap out as you go. Certain things are very kind of sticky and fundamental to the stack, and they're hard to switch out. And related to this shiny object syndrome thing, one way you can sort of vet whether it's something you should be playing with is how married are you going to be to that once you start using it? Because it's actually, in my opinion, totally fine to be playing with stuff that is really easy to swap out. It's when you start, getting when you succumb to shiny object syndrome with something that is really hard to replace down the road, really expensive, really disruptive, whatever it is. And so, what makes really great architects is being able to distinguish between those two things and put a ton of thought and care into making the right decision on the things that are very foundational and hard to swap out, and not being flippant about, but understanding that there are other pieces that are a lot easier to have in flux.
And that's a really good point. I mean, and I hadn't considered that in my answer, but you're absolutely right. If it's easy to change, try it and see what happens. I mean, if it's not super expensive, of course. It's gonna, lots of decisions have to be made that way, of course. But yeah, the sticky stuff. I mean, something that's the core to the business, you got to take more care with. Um, and that's I think it goes for anything.
So I'm really looking forward to asking this question because we have a few minutes left here. I know that this is a topic that we both have kind of strong feelings about, and we have not discussed this beforehand. So let's do it.
I know where you're going.
You know
College
where?
degree versus not college degree.
Yeah. So part of the skills thing we're talking about here is being able to do it. There's also being able to show on paper that you can do it, and to a prospective employer or maybe your current employer, you're trying to say, give me a promotion, give me a raise. There is a sort of quantifiable certification, if you will, that you can do it. I want to have a little discussion about, degree versus certifications. Do IT professionals entering the profession today need a degree? What sort of certifications are important? All those sorts of things are on the table. We only have a few minutes here, but I guess let's start with practicing IT professionals, who are probably most of the people watching this show. That's what you are. If a practicing IT professional is looking to level up, should they go back to school? Should they pursue some agnostic certifications? Should they pursue vendor certifications? What do you think?
So I worked in higher ed for a long time, so I'm going to be a little bit biased. But I do think a degree is a worthy investment for most people. Now, the challenge is that higher education, especially in the U.S., is ridiculously expensive in a lot of places. There's just no way around it. We hear about the student debt crisis constantly. We hear about these people walking around with six-figure student loans, student debt over their head for the rest of their lives. That I don't think you should do. I'm not a big fan of going 6 figures into debt for most degrees, especially IT people. Um, Now, obviously, if you're going to become a doctor or a lawyer or something like that, there's a different career path. There's a different expectation there. I would much rather have them more educated than you know doing some online course for how to do brain surgery. Um, but in terms of career progression, I don't think to get into the IT field you need a degree at all. It's very possible to learn the technical skills and do very, very well. I think the challenge comes as you want to switch jobs or if you want to move up the ladder. And there's going to be a point at which there will either be a firm requirement or a serious preference toward people that have some kind of a degree, at least a bachelor's or a master's degree. And when you think about the why, um, for most schools, if as long as they're regionally accredited, I'm a big fan of regional accreditation. Now, there's different kinds of accreditation. Regional accreditation in the U.S. is the strongest kind of accreditation, and it's the most widely respected, and ensures at least some kind of commonality and rigidity of the degree. I'm not. That's not the right word, but or validity of the degree. And what you get in college is a more broad view of what you're doing. So yeah, you have to take, one of the things people lament is I have to take a bunch of classes I don't want. Yeah, that's true. But the whole purpose is to exit the college as a more well-rounded individual. And it goes back to that critical piece of context. The more you know, the easier it is to place things into context. If you haven't achieved that degree, or it doesn't mean you can't get that context other ways, but the degree itself is evidence that you at least sat through the class. I mean, you may not have learned anything long term, but it gives an employer, a prospective employer, at least some semblance of, okay, this person had the wherewithal to do this, and I know they got at least a baseline of other things other than what we're specifically hiring them for that are important, so, some kind of soft skills and things like that. Now, there's other beneficial things to the experience of going to college that can be strong too. I mean, depending on where you go, the networking opportunities you have can be incredible. There's no replacement for that, educationally in a certification world. That's not to say certifications are not absolutely critical for technical people in the IT world. I don't think that this is an either or discussion. I actually think that both are good. And if you can see, there are institutions today where you can do both. Colleges like Western Governors University is a private, regionally accredited, fully online at your own pace institution that people are getting degrees quickly because they can demonstrate knowledge of a subject. You lose a little bit in terms of networking opportunity and sort of the interaction with other students, but you end up with the credential that people are looking for in so many ways. And there are, from a career and success standpoint, there's tons of evidence that basically says people with degrees earn far more over their lifetime than people without, and job opportunities are far more abundant for people with degrees than without. So, sure, you don't need it to get into the field. You can get hired with a certification or a willingness to learn, but over your lifetime, it's going to open up a whole lot more doors for most people than a lack of a degree, than not having a degree would.
So I have similar opinions in a lot of ways. I'm not as big of a fan of college in general, but there's a really big caveat, which is whether I feel that way or not. In a lot of job searchers' cases, it doesn't matter because whether or not you're capable, if you can't make it through the HR vetting system, that's just going to knock you right off the list if you don't have a degree. It doesn't matter how good you are. And so I I will be leaving the option for my kids very open, and I will help them understand there's many paths to get to where they want to go. But we do have a challenge to overcome in just getting through the front door. Not that that can't be overcome too, but it's something you're going
Yeah,
to run into if you don't have the degree for sure.
and right or wrong, that is just the reality. I
Yeah.
mean, technically, does a job require that I took a biology class? Probably not. Who cares? But it's the totality of the experience that a lot of employers are looking for.
So now for active practitioners, I think if you're looking to advance, I am a huge fan of certification programs. I think especially just because it worked really well for me. Maybe it's not for everybody, but what I love about them is you may be sitting in a position where you want to do more, whatever that means to you, more advanced things, but your boss wants you focused on these things that to you feel more menial. If you can acquire, possibly on your own, and demonstrate that you have the skills to do this more important job, it puts you in a position of strength to negotiate where either you can say to your boss, hey, here's what I want to do. I've already demonstrated that I have the skills. Let me do that. Or you can go do it somewhere else. But you're in a position of strength negotiating there. So I don't know if I've ever shared this exactly, but early on in my career, which is one of the areas I think
So
the
3 weeks
certification
ago.
I think the certifications are especially valuable early on. They're a huge catalyst. They'll
Agreed.
accelerate you way faster than without. Early on, I pushed pretty hard on some certifications that some of those I paid for out of my own pocket. I was working at night to learn the stuff. I mean, my employer didn't give me a whole lot there. I did that myself, but over the span of 2.5 years or so, I quadrupled my salary. And I attribute most of that to the work that I put in on those certifications, demonstrating that I had the skills, and then going to somebody and saying, look, I got the skills. This is what I want to do. So I love certifications, and I think they're highly valuable. And the ROI is huge. Like you'll have to put in
Agreed.
work, but frankly, most kind of mid-tier professional certifications, let's say VCP, is that still a thing? It was a thing for me. VCP, I don't know, 400 or 500 bucks to take the test, which it's a decent chunk of change, but you're going to make many thousands of dollars more in your next career move because you spent that 500 bucks. So a lot of times an employer will help you with that. If they won't,
Yeah.
I would find the 500 bucks and do it because at least in my experience, it made a huge difference.
So my career progression started out with, I mean, I did 2 years of college and then went into the IT field with no certifications at that point. But it was a different time. I mean, certifications were very different at the time. But very shortly after starting that job, three of my coworkers, or maybe it ended up being one, I think, maybe one or two, we ended up doing the MCSE, original MCSE, OG MCSE together. And we went and bought these monstrous books, like 800 page, 1,000 page, 1,200 page books, and literally read them cover to cover while we were working our day jobs doing this stuff. And we went and got our MCSEs together. Um, at the same time, I was that we were doing that. I was working on my bachelor's degree as well, um, and I can. After that job, I I had a couple more jobs that were very technical. That the certification. I also did a Novell certification at the time because Novell was great back in its day and huge. Not anymore. It's different. Um, and the certification absolutely helped me move forward and get my foot in the door. However, there came a point where I decided I want to move into IT management. I would say that my early IT management uh, roles were they were an equal mix of technical and management work, and the certifications really did help me stand out on the technical side. But if I didn't have a degree, I wouldn't even been considered for the career progression that I was looking for. If I'd stayed inside the same organization, it probably would have been easier to move up without the degree because I was a known quantity. But going in against other people that did have something that was listed as requirements for the jobs I was looking for, I think the degree helped me make sure that I checked off that HR box. Whether it was necessary to be successful in the job or not, to your point, I needed to check the box for HR. And I would have not been able to move into the roles I did, especially working as a CIO in higher education, if I didn't have a legitimate degree. That's something that I needed to consider.
Yeah. So I have one parting thought, and then I'll turn it over to you for any parting thoughts, and we got to wind it down here. I think that today that barrier is there. I think that quite possibly in the future, a ways out, perhaps 5 years, maybe more, I have a hunch that a significant amount of the more technical work is going to be able to be accomplished by sort of in more of a gig work kind of model. And that has its own challenges, and I acknowledge that. But I think, especially on the kind of software side, like when it comes to development, I think if you imagine a decentralized Upwork for development, if you try and do that today, you're mostly just going to hate yourself. It's a little rough yet. But I think
Yeah,
we're still headed on that trajectory. And I think that there may be a period of time, again, quite a ways out yet, where it's all about the skills and only the skills. And it doesn't matter if you have the degree because you can make a great income purely on sort of project based work where the only requirement, the prerequisite, is that you have the skills.
I agree with you wholeheartedly on that front. The gig economy is a very different beast than the traditional economy many of us have grown up with, and there's going to be different catalysts to success. And being able to demonstrate that you have a fundamental grasp of the technical particulars of whatever industry you're trying to do in that economy is going to be outweigh everything else. And I can't see in most cases why someone, let's think about Upwork. I'm not going to ask people about their bachelor's degree or something like that on that. I'm looking
Right,
for skills today.
right.
So yes, from that perspective, absolutely. If you're looking for people that can help grow with you and help grow your organization, I do think a more well-rounded person makes sense. But if you're looking for someone to attack a particular task, I don't care what their degree is. I care that they can get the task done. Um, that's not to say, again, I don't want to make it sound like you can't become well-rounded without a college degree. People have done it for since man was first invented, and it's but it does, again, it provides sort of that baseline for you've proven something, um, but it's not the only way to achieve what employers are looking for. But it's objective. I mean, right or wrong, it's an objective way to do it. So employers are still doing it. Actually, our job announcements here at Actual Tech Media do indicate we prefer people with a degree. I don't think we've ever actually checked. Now that I
And
think about it,
I think that's probably true for lots of companies. Probably put that on the requirements. They don't even actually care or check. Where you get into a problem is, I think, especially bigger companies today are using technology to vet those resumes, and
bingo.
it either will check or it'll at least boot you if you don't say you have the degree. You could probably
Right.
fake it out by a little white lie, but that's a really good point. We ask for it, but I don't think we ever check.
No, we don't. I mean, it is what it is. And that's probably very telling as to how important it is for a lot of organizations. But whatever.
Oh man. Well, Scott, thank you for your thoughts on this. For those of you that have been with us live, thanks for being with us today. I hope this discussion was useful. If you're watching after the fact, please leave a comment and let us know your thoughts on career growth, on watching trends, on avoiding shiny object syndrome, and about degrees and certifications and all of that. We'd love for you to weigh in here. So, again, thanks, Scott. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. We'll see you next
Thank you.
week.